Mirrors have always made me a little uneasy, especially at night. You know that feeling, when it's dark and you catch a glimpse of yourself in the reflection, but something feels off? Like maybe it's not quite you looking back? Well, after what happened to me last winter, that feeling became a full-on fear. It started with my grandma's passing. She was a complicated woman, fiercely private, and her house always had an air of mystery about it. After her funeral, my family was tasked with sorting through her things, and one item stood out to me: a large, intricately framed mirror that had hung in her bedroom for as long as I could remember. I always felt it added to her room's unsettling charm, a kind of eerie elegance. But standing in front of it again, I felt this strange pull, a need to take it with me. I can't explain why. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe I wanted a piece of her with me. My parents thought it was strange that I'd want something like that, but they let me keep it. I hung the mirror on the wall across from my bed, thinking it would add a nice touch to my room. For the first few nights, it was fine. But then I started noticing odd things. I'd feel this sudden chill when I passed by it, like stepping into a pocket of cold air. Then I'd see flickers of movement in my peripheral vision. At first, I dismissed it. I thought, maybe I'm just getting creeped out because of the whole eerie mirror trope. But then things started getting weirder. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a tapping sound. It was faint but distinct, almost like someone knocking. Still half asleep, I lay there, listening, trying to pinpoint the source. And then it hit me. The sound was coming from inside the mirror. My heart started racing. I sat up, staring at the mirror, telling myself it was probably a draft or something in the house settling. But then I saw it. A faint handprint pressed against the glass. It wasn't mine. It was smaller, almost childlike, and the fingers were thin, with strange angles that made my stomach twist. The handprint lingered for a moment, then slowly faded. I was too stunned to move. I kept staring at the mirror, waiting for something else to happen, my heart pounding in my chest. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I told myself I was just overreacting, that I'd probably fallen into some kind of half-awake state and imagined the whole thing. The next night, though, it happened again. The tapping, the handprint. This time, it was followed by a cold, sinking feeling in my gut, like I was being watched. I wanted to run, but something held me there, as if I was under some sort of spell. And that's when I noticed something even more unsettling. The reflection. It was wrong. When I looked directly at the mirror, everything seemed normal, but as soon as I glanced away, out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw movement. Not me, but something behind me, in the mirror's depths. I know it sounds insane, but it felt like the mirror itself was alive, like something was hiding inside it, waiting for me to look away. The third night, I was ready with my phone, determined to capture some proof. I wanted to show someone, anyone, that I wasn't losing my mind. When the tapping started, I hit record and turned my camera toward the mirror, and sure enough, I saw it. A faint, foggy handprint pressing against the glass. But this time, as I watched, the hand started to move, sliding across the glass in slow, deliberate strokes, as if it were tracing invisible symbols. I felt a chill run through me, but I forced myself to keep watching, not daring to blink. Then, suddenly, the handprint vanished, replaced by the faint outline of a face. Hollow eyes, dark and empty, stared back at me from within the glass. I gasped, dropping my phone, and the face disappeared. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone, and I checked the video, desperate to see if I'd caught anything. But when I played it back, there was nothing. No handprint, no face, nothing but my own terrified reflection. By now, I was completely unnerved. I covered the mirror with a sheet, thinking that would solve the problem. But that night, I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. to the sound of tapping, louder this time, more insistent. I tried to ignore it, burying my head under the covers, but the tapping kept going, relentless, echoing in the stillness of the room. Then, a voice, faint, almost a whisper, drifted through the silence. It sounded like my grandma's voice, but wrong, twisted somehow. It said my name, drawing it out in a slow, chilling murmur. Anna. I froze, my heart hammering as I listened, too terrified to move. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I remember was waking up to daylight streaming through my window. The tapping had stopped, and the room was quiet. I ripped the sheet off the mirror, desperate to see if anything had changed. The mirror looked normal, as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The tapping returned the following night, and every night after that, always at 3 a.m., I tried everything, covering the mirror, hiding it in the closet, even putting it in the garage. But no matter where I put it, I'd hear that tapping, always coming from just beyond reach, always accompanied by that faint whisper of my name. I finally couldn't take it anymore. I took the mirror out to the backyard, grabbed a hammer, and shattered it into 1,000 pieces. As the glass splintered, I heard one final whisper, soft, almost disappointed. "Goodbye, Anna." I thought that was the end of it, that I'd broken whatever curse had haunted me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that tapping. It's faint, barely audible, but it's there. And every once in a while, I'll catch a glimpse of my reflection in a window or a dark screen, and I'll see those hollow eyes staring back at me. I work as a night security guard at a warehouse downtown. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills, and most nights are uneventful. The place itself isn't too creepy, just a sprawling building filled with boxes, shelves, and shadows. But there's one part of my job that's always made me uneasy: the alley behind the building. It's a narrow, dark path bordered by a row of empty buildings on one side and the warehouse on the other. At night, it's pitch black, and there's this oppressive feeling that hangs in the air, like the walls are closing in. My rounds require me to walk through that alley once every hour, and I hate it. For the first few months, nothing happened, just the usual rustling of stray cats and the hum of distant traffic. But one night, as I was doing my rounds, I noticed something strange. At the far end of the alley, in the deepest shadow, I saw a figure, an old man, just standing there, looking at me. At first I thought he might be homeless, maybe looking for shelter. I called out to him, asking if he was all right, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring, his face hidden in the darkness. I took a few steps closer, repeating my question, but he remained silent. Something about him felt off. His stillness, the way he stood, it was unnerving. I radioed into the main office, but before I could explain what I was seeing, the old man turned and walked deeper into the alley, disappearing around the corner. I finished my rounds, half expecting him to come back, but the rest of the night was quiet. I figured he was just a drifter, maybe spooked by my presence, and I tried to put it out of my mind. But the next night, he was there again, standing in the exact same spot, staring at me. This time, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I called out to him again, and once again, he turned and walked away without a word. His movements were slow, almost deliberate, as if he wanted me to follow him. Against my better judgment, I walked down the alley, hoping to catch up with him, but by the time I reached the corner, he was gone. I even checked the nearby streets, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. For the next week, he showed up every night, always in the same spot, always staring. I started dreading my rounds, feeling my stomach knot with anticipation every time I approached the alley. I told a coworker about it, hoping he'd back me up, but he just laughed it off, saying I was spooking myself. But I knew what I was seeing. The old man was real, and there was something deeply wrong about him. One night, the air felt different, colder, heavier. As I stepped into the alley, I saw him closer this time, standing in a patch of moonlight. His face was visible now, and I could see every detail: the pale, wrinkled skin, the deep-set, vacant eyes, and a mouth that was slightly open, as if frozen mid-sentence. But what struck me most was his expression. It was empty, devoid of any humanity, like he was just a shell. I took a step back, heart pounding, and as I did, he raised his hand, pointing down the alley toward the corner. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, and his arm hung at an unnatural angle, like a puppet's. I didn't move. I didn't want to know what he was pointing at, but something compelled me to look. I turned my gaze down the alley and saw another figure, a young man this time, lying face down on the ground. My blood ran cold. I could just make out the outline of his body in the shadows. His limbs splayed out at odd angles, as if he'd been thrown there. The old man kept pointing, his hollow eyes fixed on me as if urging me to go closer. Against every instinct, I inched forward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The young man was wearing a security uniform, exactly like mine. A chill crept over me as I realized I was looking at myself, or at least someone who looked exactly like me, lying dead in the alley. I stumbled back, heart racing, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. But when I looked up, the old man was gone. The alley was empty, silent, as if nothing had ever happened. I bolted back to the main building, trying to shake off the terror that had gripped me, but the image of that body, my body, stayed with me. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Who would believe me? But the next night, I couldn't bring myself to do my rounds. I stayed in the main office, watching the security cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of the old man on the screen. But there was nothing. The alley was empty, just a stretch of darkness on the monitor. A week later, the nightmares started. Every night, I'd dream of the alley, of that lifeless body on the ground, and the old man standing over it, watching me with those empty eyes. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the terror fresh in my mind, unable to shake the feeling that it was more than just a dream. I finally quit the job. I couldn't take it anymore. But even now, months later, I still see him sometimes, in the shadows of alleys, in reflections, in the corner of my eye. And every time I look, he's pointing down, as if to remind me of what I saw. I don't know who he is or what he wants, but I have a sinking feeling that one day I'll end up in that alley again, and this time I might not walk out. Last summer, my friend Sarah invited a group of us to her family's lake house for a weekend getaway. The house was beautiful, old but well kept, tucked away by the water's edge with thick woods on three sides. It was quiet, isolated, and peaceful. Or so we thought. I didn't realize that weekend would change how I felt about the place forever. There were 6 of us in total, all friends from college. The first day was perfect. Swimming in the lake, grilling by the water, and laughing late into the night. By the time we turned in, it was close to 2 a.m., and I was exhausted. The house had 3 bedrooms, so we doubled up. Sarah and I shared one of the rooms, and we were out cold within minutes. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. At first I didn't know why, but then I heard it. A quiet, rhythmic tapping, like someone was knocking on the glass. My heart skipped a beat as I lay there, straining to hear. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, and I realized it was coming from the sliding glass door that opened onto the lake. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was probably just a tree branch tapping against the glass. But then I remembered. There were no trees close enough to the door to make that sound. Slowly, I turned my head and looked across the room. Sarah was still asleep, undisturbed. I was about to wake her up when the tapping stopped. I waited, heart pounding, but after a few minutes of silence, I convinced myself it was just my imagination and went back to sleep. The next morning, I told Sarah about what I'd heard. She laughed, saying I was probably still half asleep, but the others were intrigued. One of our friends, Emma, admitted she'd woken up in the middle of the night too, feeling strangely uneasy. We joked about it, not thinking much of it, and spent the rest of the day out on the lake. That night, though, things took a turn. We stayed up late again, and just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard the tapping again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. I lay there, frozen, feeling the hairs on my arms stand up. I nudged Sarah awake, whispering, "Do you hear that?" She listened, her eyes widening as the tapping continued. This time it was more insistent, like someone was trying to get our attention. We both sat up, staring at the sliding glass door across the room. Through the glass, we could just make out the dark outline of the lake and the trees in the distance. But there was no one there, no one visible anyway. Then suddenly, the door handle rattled. My breath caught in my throat as we watched the handle slowly turn, as if someone was trying to open it from the outside. Sarah grabbed my hand, her grip tight, and we stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the handle stopped moving and the tapping resumed. Softer, almost gentle. We stayed like that, paralyzed with fear, until the sun started to rise. As soon as there was enough light, we ran outside hoping to find some kind of explanation, maybe footprints or signs that someone had been there. But there was nothing. The ground was undisturbed, the grass still damp with morning dew. That morning, I told the others what had happened. Emma looked shaken, saying she'd heard the tapping too, along with something else. She described it as a soft humming, like someone humming an old, unfamiliar tune outside her window. None of us could explain it, but the mood for the rest of the day was tense. Every noise, every creak of the house seemed amplified. On the final night, we were all too uneasy to sleep. We stayed up, playing cards, trying to keep our minds off what had happened. Around midnight, the power went out. We sat in darkness, only the dim glow of our phone flashlights breaking through the pitch black. The silence was thick, suffocating, and I could feel the tension in the room building. Then, we heard it, the tapping. It started at the glass door in the living room, then moved to the kitchen window, then to the windows in each bedroom, one by one, like someone, or something, was making its way around the house, checking each entry point. We huddled together, too terrified to move. The tapping grew louder, faster, until it seemed like there were multiple people surrounding the house, all tapping in unison. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We sat there, holding our breath, hoping it was over. But then we heard footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, moving toward the front door. The door handle rattled and a low, muffled voice whispered, "Let me in." That was it. We grabbed our things, piled into the car, and left the lake house that instant. None of us spoke the whole drive home, the fear still thick in the air. Sarah's family visited the house a few days later to check things out, but they didn't find anything unusual. No footprints, no signs of anyone breaking in. To this day, we still don't know what or who was at the lake house that weekend. But every time I think about it, I remember that voice, soft, almost pleading, asking to be let in. And I wonder what would have happened if we had.